Su-Lin Wong is a reporter for The Economist and the host of The Prince, a podcast exploring Xi's rise. And she joins me now. Good to have you with us. If we look at Xi Jinping, certainly from Western eyes, you look at someone who is seen as an authoritarian, almost dictatorial figure, a great man of history imposing his will and potentially dangerous for the world. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Xi Jinping is incredibly ambitious, incredibly driven, very focused on consolidating and accumulating power. But as you say, he's also a man who deeply understands Chinese history. He sees himself as a true inheritor of the Chinese Communist Party.
Like the third of the great leaders, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and now he's finishing that work. That's how he sees himself, isn't it?
Exactly. His father raised Xi Jinping and his brothers and sisters to believe that they were true revolutionaries and that they would inherit the revolution.
He's what's called a princeling, of course. You mentioned he's the son of Communist Party royalty. But his family had really been through the ups and downs of the party. His father purged. Xi Jinping sent down to the farms during the Cultural Revolution. There are many reasons that he may have turned away from the party. Why the opposite?
That's right. His dad had a falling out with Mao and was purged, and Xi Jinping's whole life was turned upside down. And he was sent to live in a cave for 7 years. Actually, alongside millions of other Chinese of his generation, many urban youths.
And he saw that as the making of him, didn't it?
Exactly. And so, for many of his generation, they wanted nothing to do with the Communist Party after that traumatic childhood. And some wanted nothing to do with China. But Xi Jinping made a very different choice. And he actually decided to double down on the party and become redder than red. And so his conclusion from his childhood wasn't that the party in and of itself was bad. It was that the party had lost control. So if he ever rose to the top, he would make sure that wouldn't happen again.
How does he rise to the top? What's the trajectory? From the boy sent down during the Cultural Revolution, his father purged, he enters the party and starts moving through the ranks. How does he get to the top?
So one thing that makes Xi Jinping a really interesting Chinese leader is that he's a tried and tested politician. He went to the provinces, which is kind of like the equivalent of a Communist Party MBA for Chinese officials. And he started at the bottom rung and he saw how brutal and ruthless the Communist Party is, and he rose through its ranks all the way to the party secretary of Shanghai, and then he became China's leader after that.
When he takes over, there is a lot of... China was at a bit of a tipping point. You'd had all of the growth of the economic revolution. It was emerging into a new era, becoming much more comfortable, even assertive with its power. But there were warnings from people like the former Premier Wen Jiabao about corruption that could cripple the party. There were rising tensions in the country. What does Xi Jinping look to deliver when he takes over to reassert the party and set the course for the nation?
When Xi Jinping came into power 10 years ago, the country was in crisis and the Chinese Communist Party was in crisis. As you're saying, corruption was rampant. There were hundreds of thousands of protests and there was infighting at the very, very top of the Communist Party. And he took power, he launched a signature corruption crackdown that he genuinely used to crack down on corruption.
But it was very popular too.
And it was popular, but it was also conveniently used by him to crack down on his political rivals. And then he also really ramped up ideological discipline within the Communist Party, which has nearly 100 million members, so many more people than the population of Germany. So he first seized control of the Communist Party through his corruption crackdown and ideology, and then having seized control of the party, he used it to seize control of the rest of China. And what we've seen over the past 10 years is he's constructed this censorship machine, propaganda machine, surveillance machine, which has made it incredibly difficult now for popular discontent to actually bubble to the surface.
What is the aim of this? I know he talks about a harmonious society. He talks about the China dream. He talks about returning China to the apex of global power. But where does this take a country if you crack down so hard, if you silence dissenting voices? What sort of a country are you leading?
I think we have to look back to his childhood and his teenage years and the chaos of all of that, because the lesson Xi Jinping drew is that that chaos cannot be repeated and there must be control. And there's only one institution in China who he believes can exert that control, and that's the Chinese Communist Party. And he just so happens to be the man who should be leading the Communist Party. So he's really driven by this desire for control and the sort of fear of chaos.
There was this belief that he has that the West is waning, the East is rising. This is China's time. It has a new model. You can export this model of authoritarian capitalism, if you want to call it that, to the rest of the world. Where does he want to take the country? And what does that mean for the rest of the world?
Well, going back to what we were saying about Xi Jinping's dad, his dad saw his mission as founding a strong China. And Xi Jinping sees himself as an inheritor of that mission. And he believes his role is now to make China even stronger, even bigger and even better. And so he talks about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which really is, to borrow a phrase, about making China great again. And so that's what's driving Xi Jinping. And as China's economy grows even bigger, and as the rest of the world is more intertwined with China's economy, what we're seeing is the Chinese Communist Party, led by Xi Jinping, using its economic might to bully and coerce other countries.
Now, what stands in the way of him achieving these ambitions? Will it be because he runs into opposition from other countries and China becomes isolated? Will it be that he simply cannot control everything? Will there be an uprising inside the country against this more dictatorial, authoritarian turn? What stands in the way of him achieving this China dream?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to know for sure. It's hard to know if he is going to achieve what he wants to achieve, or if there are going to be serious headwinds. I mean, right now, looking at what's happening inside China, zero COVID and a slowing economy are both huge challenges.
An ageing population as well?
That's right. And then on top of that, if, as we expect, he stays on for a third term, perhaps a fourth, perhaps for the rest of his life, that raises serious questions about succession. Who might take after him? And, if we don't know who the successor is, that causes a lot of uncertainty at the top of the party.
And this leads to the final question, really. And I want you to try to look ahead and imagine what could happen. We know that emperors don't always end well in China. Mao Zedong, for all of his power, became incredibly paranoid. And that was part of the Cultural Revolution, part of the purging of other people like Xi's father. What's to say that Xi Jinping, even though he has crowned himself a new emperor, if you like, a leader for life, will actually stay in power?
Oh, that's anyone's guess. It's really, really hard to know. I mean, so much of Chinese politics is a black box. It's so opaque. And the indications are that he's going to appoint a bunch of his protégés, a bunch of his people over the next few days. He's going to become even more powerful than he currently is. But as you say, I mean, how long will that last? What happens if he gets sick in office? What happens if he dies in office? I mean, that's an open question.
Or if protests, and we've seen some signs of that, do actually gather steam. If the economy starts to weaken even more quickly, will we see a movement?
Well, I think what Chinese history teaches us is that it's often political infighting at the very top of the party that, sometimes spills onto the streets. That is the real risk for instability for the Communist Party. So yes, popular discontent is something to keep an eye on, but also I think the real risk for Xi Jinping is if he creates enemies at the very top of the party. But right now we have no indication that that is the case.
Sue, terrific podcast you've done and fantastic to have you on the program. Thank you again.
Thanks, Stan.